Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to talk about a special little thing that happened in Portland, Oregon earlier this year, where I got to attend what was known as Poetry Slam. This is the art of competitive performance poetry, and believe me, it gets out there and it gets pretty interesting. The judges are selected from the audience, and those scores are used to determine who advances. Our guest joining us today was certainly one who caught my eye as she took the stage and claimed the audience, and she took second place, although I kind of debate that that's where she belonged. I believe she was the winner. We thought we'd bring her here on the program today to basically enlighten the audience to what Poetry Slam is, which has been around for quite a while. The competition in Portland, Oregon was known as Verslandia, and she's been in competition for the last 3 years, and so far has made it to the finals in her sophomore and her senior years. That's right. She's a senior in high school in the local Portland area. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, McKinley Rodriguez. McKinley, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Are you getting ready to Poetry Slam me?
Yes, I am.
I thought you would. Yeah, I understand that you have something prepared there. Now, how did you get started with all this? And give us an idea what Poetry Slam actually is from your perspective.
So I started to write and perform my own poetry when I was in 6th grade because my teacher, David Weirth at Jackson Middle School, had a coffee house where all the 6th graders in his class wrote some poetry, and then at the end of the year we performed it for our parents and other people that came to watch. And so basically that's where I started learning that poetry wasn't just sort of an end rhyme, really pre-scripted sort of thing. I learned that it could be fluid and almost more like prose. And from there I kind of had a little bit of just a time during middle school where I wrote poetry, where I wrote for the school poetry zine, and then my freshman year at Wilson I was part of a school-wide slam. And I also developed my skills a little bit through speech and debate because one of the competition areas is poetry recitation. And then finally my sophomore, basically through senior years, they have offered Verslandia through literary arts in Portland Public Schools, and I've loved the opportunity to be able to share my slam with people who are ready to hear it.
Now, as I was watching you perform, I noticed that you really captured the audience. You really seemed to be very witty. You grabbed them. There was a lot of humor in what you did. But what I noticed from the other competitors, they seemed to be more serious, kind of grinding out a little bit. Not that you weren't yourself, but you kind of wonder, does there tend to be at that age sort of a compelling anger of outrage or something like that? They tend to follow that same theme through all of them?
Well, this is speaking from the perspective of someone who in the past has written very serious poetry, because basically all my past slams have been kind of a serious undertone, and I think that to an extent that, this can be true of teenagers, but I think it's true of the poetry writing or even writing population as a whole. Essentially, I find that I write best when I have some sort of objective or I have something that I'm responding to. Mm-hmm. And I think that we often think, I just want to write about this thing because I see it. For example, like when we're in nature, we say, this is really pretty, so I want to respond to it with writing. But I found that sometimes my strongest writing or most emotional writing happens when I have a specific sort of interaction, or there's something that I feel that is unjust, or something that I don't feel that good about. And so I think that this year was sort of unique for me in the sense that I felt very strongly about something, but it was it was not on the side of injustice or on something that I didn't really see fit with society, but it was something that I love Portland, and so that was sort of something that I felt that I was able to bring out, and I think that maybe I was able to develop that skill as I've progressed as a slam writer and performer. Mm-hmm.
I know that being in media as long as I have, it's interesting when they try to take a look at this generation, and they say, well, they seem disconnected and caught up, in technology, and they just don't seem to care too much. And you hear this theme running, and I'm thinking, well, I don't know where you're collecting your samples from, but there's some magnificent stuff going on out there with this generation here, and certainly, that hasn't been lost, especially in their oratory creativity, such as what I experienced with Verslandia.
Mm-hmm. I entirely agree that I think that Poetry Slam is something that really contextualizes what individuals have to say, especially students, because I think that oftentimes if we basically say, what you have to say has to be either political or it has to be something that could be, publishable in the news, when we open up to that poetry format, you kind of have that that sort of breathing room to say, I'm not maybe sure of my idea. I might have some sort of doubts, or I might have some sort of way that I want to explore it. And I think that what I enjoy about poetry is that I get to explore the ideas that I'm talking about as well, based on how I feel that, for example, my performance of the poetry, or how I feel over time as maybe a poem grows older. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what I found with the poetry that I'm going to talk about today. That at the beginning when I was writing it, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I like Portland. But by the end of it, I found it a very emotional piece because there was a stronger connection that I had basically had over time with the words.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you start to put this all together, it's really interesting as you listen to people who perform at Poetry Slam. Sometimes people might think, well, that sort of sounds like rap music that we hear today. Mm-hmm. Is that sort of like the birth of rap music, or what do you think it is there?
I'm not exactly sure. I'm not very well versed in sort of the history of slam, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's. I mean, it would make sense that kind of that sort of blending of different arts. That we even saw at Verslandia there were some competitors who sang or had more of a sort of a present beat in their music. And I think that even though I don't necessarily have a specific beat in what I'm saying, I kind of draw on the different syllables in almost a melodic way sometimes with certain poems. And so I think that there's definitely a connection. I think people usually see rap music as something that's negative because they think that it's misogynistic, or they think that it's that it's homophobic, or they have these different preconceived notions about rap music. But I think once you see that there are very blurred lines between poetry and rap, that sometimes these can be seen as very positive things, and it's just basically the things that we see on the surface. For example, the things that are topping the charts on music and iTunes, those are very different from sort of individual repurposing of this type of art and media.
Mm-hmm. Now, the type of people who actually get involved in Poetry Slam, too, is this kind of a way they go into this because it's a way they can they can express themselves. And in some cases, I know there's a great documentary out there about the national competition of Poetry Slam, and you realize for some of these youngsters, this is really pulling them out of pretty much an area, like, for instance, in education, where normally they just wouldn't actively be involved and perhaps even drop out. So it actually seems to be saving some young kids as well.
I think that it definitely spawns sort of a greater involvement, and oftentimes when people think of something like an English essay where they feel like they have to write this 5-paragraph essay, or they feel that they have to write about something that they feel strongly about in a pre-scripted way, I think that this really sort of reaches out and gives the sort of not only the autonomy of what you're saying, but the way you say it to the individual.
Mm-hmm. I could just imagine, too, the diversity of somebody who begins to take this on, and they begin learning reading, writing, and then the expression of what they're reading and writing, and it's just really excellent in how this helps somebody really develop.
I think that it's a very powerful tool, and I think that it really was formative in the way that I learned to, read for things like symbols and motifs in reading, and has made me probably a more aware reader than I would have been if I wasn't exposed to poetry in middle school to such a large extent.
I know it's just really amazing to watch how they put all this together and the command of the language they have, and sometimes it gets even more sophisticated as they get better and better at this. Do you find yourself being more, aggressive as far as language goes and learning, the power of words and kind of bringing these things together when you put together a poet?
I definitely think so. Just kind of as sort of some background, when I first did the slam my sophomore year, I had some pieces that I would say were very sort of prose-oriented. There was almost like a story that I was telling, and it wasn't a story that was a personal one, but sort of had a very symbolic element where I was describing actions that other people were doing. And I felt that I was using a lot of exposition describing what the place felt like, what the weather was like, how that affected these individuals who were within the story that I was creating. But then last year I developed I think I felt maybe not only more motivated to write a poetry piece that was more personal, but I think that over time I sort of learned that when words are powerful, they can really paint a picture for other people, but they can also help us individually to a greater extent as well. And so individually, I wrote, that was my year where I wrote a poem about a breakup, and that was something where, of course, it's, more emotional than sort of a detached prose piece. And then this year I sort of went a step further as I see it, and instead of just doing a very charged emotional piece, I took something that I'm emotional about and put it into a form that may be more accessible to people who, for example, haven't lived in Portland as long, or for people who, might not have the exact same views or view of Portland.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you see this doing for you over time? Is this something that you want to continually be involved with even after high school and into college? Or how do you see the future for you with Poetry Slam?
I definitely want to keep competing. It's something that I enjoy immensely. While I really enjoy the competitive element, I think, more so than that, I just love the act of being able to share poetry, because when you feel that the audience is excited about it, it just is something that you just want to keep going, because you want to sort of feed on their energy and have them feed on your energy. It's a very nice sort of interchange there. But I definitely want to keep participating in slams in college, and I'm sure there's going to be one, somewhere near where my college will be. And it's definitely something that I think I also make a lot of friendships with people who have similar sort of views on writing, and I like to be able to kind of gain that emotional proximity to people in such a short amount of time, even within a 3-minute poetry piece.
Mm-hmm. Now, you brought up something that I find fascinating, because I know the experience, and that is when you're up there and you're sharing or giving to an audience and they're giving back, there's this wonderful energy exchange. Now, there are people who might go up on stage and they enjoy getting the attention. You can certainly see those kind of people by their energy that that's exactly what they're doing. They're feeding off of the audience, but they're not giving much back, so to speak. But you talked about the exchange, and I tell people that's the point you want to be at. You're projecting yourself to the audience because you're giving them something back, and in return they keep giving you more so you can do the same, and it's very reciprocal. And it's a moment that you actually begin to lose yourself, and you find yourself at the same time. People might call it a Zen moment, so to speak. What does that feel like for you when that happens?
Well, I think it kind of bases off my past experience with debate, because I think that even though I only do slam poetry a couple times a year in terms of that type of performance, I do debate many times. I have dozens of debate rounds per competitive season. And so from that I've kind of learned this idea that in a debate round, you have a judge in the back of the room who decides who's the winner and the loser, and you can really decide where the round needs to go based on sort of their facial expressions, sort of how they are reacting to what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And so I think that I've somewhat translated into, somewhat inadvertently translated into the way I deliver poetry, where, especially with my piece this year, which as you'll see later is a humorous one, it basically, I basically give for example, a joke to the audience, or I give some sort of thing that I think is funny, and people laugh at that, and so then that kind of gives me that confidence that the next thing that I'm going to say, that they're going to, that they're going to follow suit and kind of keep laughing at those things. And so that's kind of the superficial aspect that, they're laughing, they're happy about it. But I think that moment of being able to really feel that connection with the audience is when maybe they're laughing or they're reacting in some way, and it doesn't bother you that you need to stop and slow down and change the pacing of your poem that you've practiced, that it just sort of slips into your piece just like maybe new words that you've added in an impromptu way, and that their interaction becomes part of your piece.
Now, McKinley, for our audience, if you could, please give them an idea. What are the judges specifically looking for when they judge a competition like Poetry Slam?
Well, I guess every Poetry Slam can be different. As you mentioned, that there are some slams where they have sort of random people taken from the audience, and in Verselandia in particular, we had a couple local slam poets or people who work in poetry, and then also some people who were just members of the community or members of literary arts. And so I think that generally, if I were a judge, what I would look for is, does the person connect with their piece? Does it really look like they wrote this piece? And even more than that, does it feel like they're giving the poem, or does it feel like they're reciting the poem? Mm-hmm. Because I think that it's, for example, in the second round of Verselandia, I read my poem, and I was really trying to, even though I was reading it, trying to make it seem like something that I was delivering in sort of a dynamic way, and that's a really hard thing to do. And even when a poem is memorized, it's very difficult to sort of deliver it in a way that is, it's even for the individual difficult to break that barrier of saying, this is me reciting a poem, and this is me connecting with a poem that I also happen to have memorized. And then apart from that, there's, of course, the audience interaction. Are they receptive to what the audience is doing? Do they stop when the audience sort of wants there to be a bit of a pause? I guess it really depends on the poem. Does your poem seem very, are you bought into what you're saying? Do they believe that you believe what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. So it's really a matter of, do you believe, and is it with heart that you're actually expressing this?
Yes,
it sounds like. So I kind of wonder, and I have to ask you this question, McKinley, because doing something like this can actually empower someone to be very expressive in a very authentic way. How often did you find yourself uprising against your parents when they would change your curfew and you just poetry slammed them in the kitchen?
I think that,
The injustice of pancakes that are undercooked. I want to hear these things from you.
I don't rebel against my parents too much, but I think they enjoy the fact that I do slam poetry, and when I do argue, which is not too much, they would probably say that it's at least articulated well.
I could just see you out at a restaurant, and somebody brings along your meal and you don't like it, and they argue with you. Oh, really? You want to go there? Well, let's try this. And then for the next 3 minutes, you just mow them down. And it would have been better just getting your steak back to it medium rare. Now, tell us about the piece that you're going to share with our listeners today and what it involves, what it's all about.
So I was trying to think of something that I felt really strongly about that would make a good piece that not only that I would feel strongly about, but that also I could get a group of, 400, 500 people also bought into in, 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay.
So I started out with this sort of, my mom and I were talking about different poetry pieces that I've written in the past, and she said, you really love Portland, what about something like that? And I kind of sat down and I thought, I'm leaving for college in 3 or 4 months. I'm really enjoying this time in Portland, and I know that I'll miss Portland, but what's a way that I can really capture in an active way? Because I don't just want to take a snapshot, in like a postcard. I don't want to just see that picture and paint the picture that we all see in Portlandia or the picture that we all see when, like a tourist perspective. But I wanted to create some sort of very, not necessarily just intimate, but something that captures those things that aren't in the guidebooks, but that we all know about Portland. For example, I reference the political campaigners outside of Powell's. If you've ever tried to walk into Powell's, you know there are people standing right outside that door trying to ask you if you want to sign your name for a petition. And so it's those little things that I felt that people would be able to relate to, and then I also throw in humor so that that I'm connecting with the audience not only in that sort of that quote-unquote inside knowledge, but also in humor, which I feel like Portlanders have a pretty good sense of humor in general.
And certainly Portland has enough bohemian coffee shops to peruse while you're in the city as well that aren't in a lot of the tourist books.
Certainly.
Well, now the other thing we didn't mention, too, is that when you get up to do your poetry slam competition, that there is a time limit also as well.
Yes.
Okay, and that is 3 minutes?
For Verslandia, it was 3 minutes.
Okay.
And that can be sometimes difficult because when you rehearse a poem, as I've mentioned before, you don't necessarily have the audience participation when you're just reciting it to the mirror, and it really changes when you have laughter or people who are making reactionary noises.
Mm-hmm. Reactionary noises.
Those can sometimes be, snapping or
right.
or I was making a lot of noises, and I had to be careful because I was scared I was going to go hoarse before the second round.
All right, so what we're going to do is let you go ahead and go with your piece to our listeners and give them a feel for what a poetry slam sounds like from somebody who's very good at it.
We were born almost 2,000 miles apart, and I didn't understand how much we were meant for each other until I was younger than I am now and wanting to fit in. It was summer, and I rode the bus alone to see you, and upon meeting you let me smile for no other reason than the gentle sun. But in less than 4 short months we must part. And though I know a piece of me will always be with you, I somehow know it's over for now. That's why, Portland, I'm writing you a love poem. But one thing first, this isn't a fucking note, because that's not how love works. That's infatuation, not mutual fandom, tourism, and I am no tourist. Because I love your stupid one-way streets in big-ass bike lanes like crazy, like I want to tattoo Burnside with all its head shops and sex shops and bus stops on my back. I love your obsession with Powell's, though I always book it away from the political campaigners on 11th and Cooch. I want to be the pages to your book, the canvas to your art, the mic to your music, the tracks to your streetcar, and the cart to your food. And I mean, who even cares so much about food? I hate that it's a cliche, because everyone loves that about you. Like, everyone loves Between the Bars by Elliott Smith. Like, one of our mayors loves someone who wasn't quite 18. Like, the Unitarians here love their potlucks. Like, TriMet drivers seem to love being hated. Like, the Pearl District loves expensive coffee. Like, I love Lardo double burgers or kombucha. Yeah. I want to get drunk on your kombucha like the Timbers Army gets drunk, like hipsters get drunk on PBR, like Blazers fans get drunk on playoff wins. I love it how people hate separating their trash for you into landfill, recyclables, and compostables, yet how they scowl when the haters don't abide by that simple separating rule of thirds. Words, words, word. And I'm not even going to mention where to put a bird because, baby, you can't make our love into sketch comedy, and it's just you and me, and you can't recreate the way your rain makes me wet. You were home to my first swear words, first kiss, first poetry slam, and even though I know we can't always remain soulmates together, I think you love me back. The way I hurt when I'm away from you, the way walking the streets with you makes everything okay, the way I know I'll miss you. Thank you.
Very good. Now you see just how good she was. It makes you wonder how good the other competitors were as well, but you certainly stood out as aces in our book. If somebody is interested in this, and maybe not locally here in Portland, is there a website they can find out more about Poetry Slam?
Well, I know that the Verslandia website has some links on how the Poetry Slam works, and basically this is part of the Literary Arts website, I believe, and it has some information about how that scoring process happens and that sort of idea of taking random people from the audience. But I think generally a lot of cities might have slams that are either, once a week or once a month. I know in Portland we have the Portland Poetry Slam where people can sign up. I've never actually been there myself, but I've had some friends who go there. And I think that it's just a thing about getting your poetry out there, even if you're not necessarily comfortable or you don't have a ton of confidence in your work. I feel that when one shares their work, they're able to sort of improve their confidence, and in the future it will be easier and less intimidating to get their next poetry piece out there.
It reminds me of the movie with Robin Williams, I'm trying to remember, years ago, but he was talking where he was bringing the boys up in front of the class to basically be spontaneous. And he says about the one boy, he says, this boy feels that everything inside of him is worthless, and he says, bring it out, let's see what it's really like. And you realize that all of us really have something inside of us that we would like to share with other people, and this is that opportunity.
Exactly.
Yeah, very exciting stuff. McKinley, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be on the program today. What do you see yourself doing in the future here?
Well, after college, I'm not exactly sure if I want to be, an engineer, doctor, lawyer. Not really sure yet, but it's...
or a bohemian coffee owner.
Who knows?
Well, McKinley, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
I want to thank the listeners out there for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.